Welcome to this episode of Chapter Chats. I'm Denise Cardona, and I am joined by Dr. Chuck Hodel, and we are going to be discussing Chapter 3, The Adult Learner. So here we have the question most any designer who designs for adults might ask themselves on a regular basis: how do adults learn best?
Well, I don't know.
I was going to ask you to break this down for us, Chuck.
Yeah, I know. And this is the tough part because you and I are both adults, and I would assume most people watching this are adults. And, we have this thing about, everybody learns the same. And if you do this homogenous kind of approach to instructional design, that adults are just the same as fourth graders and all the rest of it. Of course, we know that's not true. And this is where we struggle sometimes as instructional designers, especially coming out of a K-12 environment, or if we went to college in a K-12 learning environment, and we're always going to be K-12 teachers. Then we learn a lot about Piaget, and we learn a lot about how children learn, and that's very important. That's the way that should be. But there's very little in the terms of how adults really do learn and what their expectations are. And a lot of this, as we've talked before many, many times on this channel, and certainly within these chapter chats, is learning as a process, as a science, is made up of so many parts that as an instructional designer, you got to look at the science of it. And the science of learning for adults is there are certain things that are expectations from adults before they'll even think about learning. So in this chapter, you look at it, some of these things will be very familiar to you. Some of them might be new. The chapter was not written to be revolutionary. It was meant to be reflective, and I hope that's what it is, because there are just so many tremendous books on adult learners, Merrill and everybody else that's working in this field. I wouldn't even stand in their shadows. But I think it's important in terms of instructional design that we look at this and the differences. And the other thing I'll say as a footnote here before we even get started is one thing that I see designers do that we need to be really careful about is don't design adult learning as if you are the learner, because each adult is different and each population is different. And what might work for you might not necessarily work for the population that you're designing for. So always step back, make sure that you're looking at populations and all the other variables in your design and approach from that. Don't approach from what would work for you.
So that being said, why is adult learning considered a distinct area of interest in ISD?
Well, I think it originally started because instructional designers mostly trained for adults and designed for adults. And it was later as other populations were involved in the process in a more general way. So I can remember in the beginning when in my grad studies, that almost everyone in there worked with adults. So everyone's going to learn to be an instructional designer at the graduate level was working with adult populations. And then we started to get a real influx of K-12 teachers that no longer wanted to be in a classroom, but wanted to stay in the field generally. So they became instructional designers, became trainers of adults, all the varieties of those kind of things. And then we started to see more of a focus on this. So I think it's another element of the maturation of instructional design that now we put the focus on this. And it's not to the exclusion of K-12 or kids or anything else. It's not what we intend to do at all. It's just we're trying to even a balance of what we look at as designers so that we are proficient and able to professionally design for all populations. And adding a little bit of information like this chapter about adult learners certainly didn't hurt anything, I hope.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, what are the differences between how adults learn and how children learn?
Well, I think one of the big differences is that adults have more choice about whether they decide to be part of this process or not. And this gets us into a larger discussion on mandated training, which I think we should probably do a video on anyway, in just in terms of how much adult training and education is actually mandated. And that's well over 70%, believe it or not. So you think about the things that you may have some choice about, even if you're in a college program, do it an undergrad or a grad degree, how much choice you have on the courses you take. Well, you may have some electives, you may not.
Right, exactly.
So everything else is mandated. And if you look at what happens in the workplace, how much of that is mandated? Almost all of it.
Absolutely.
You have to learn about safety, learn about health. You have to learn about all the things that HR and everybody else wants you to be able to sign off on. So that's mandated. So if you look at that from an adult learner perspective, this kind of changes that environment. So the thing to remember is a lot of adults did not have a great K-12 experience. And I was one of those people. My high school years were anything but about education. And I don't think that that's unique. But more importantly, I didn't feel like I was smart. I was made to feel stupid. And I know that sounds funny, but I'll bet you that a lot of people watching this have similar stories that they can tell about how they were really not encouraged in a lot of their K-12 activities, certainly as they got older and into high school, because that's just shoot the hoops and graduate kind of thing in a lot of schools. Not that there's anything wrong with the schools, that's just what it becomes sometimes with some students. So if you're an adult and you've never had a positive learning experience that you can remember, then you're going to have a different attitude about this. And as designers, we need to find a key to unlock the potential that exists in all of these adult learners.
Mm-hmm. So that would bring me to the point that instructional strategies are going to be very, very different in most cases for adult learners versus children.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think what you're going to find is you don't want to place an adult in a situation where they sit there and listen, or they're on their computer listening. And I know that people are taking courses or watching this video because they're using the textbook saying, well, I'm sitting there watching you. And to you, I say, I'm sorry. This is the only way I could deliver this to you in a reasonable way. So, bear with me. This is not your favorite way to gather information, but at least you can hit the pause button and get up and go do something else and come back to me and Denise and think about it that way. But yeah, it's really different. It's the kind of strategies that involve learners that adults like. And the things you're going to find is they want their knowledge and their experience recognized. So if you're working with adults, you need to find a way as a designer to say, we know you know a lot of stuff. We know you've got a lot of experience. We know that you bring so many things to this that we're not going to talk about or be part of in your course. But we recognize that, and we're going to work and use that information and that talent to make all of these other things work together. And adults don't like to waste time. Adults do not want to waste a second of their time. It's too precious. So you get to adult populations with children or aging adults that live with them or all the other life situations, health issues, whatever. The last thing you want to do is waste an hour of your time or 6 weeks of your time as an adult on something like that. So recognize that they are unique, recognize that they bring a lot to this, recognize that they don't want to waste their time. And I think you have a good basis as a designer to start building courses that look at all these elements and build on those for successful operation of the design process.
Great points. What are some examples of adult learning principles that designers should be paying attention to?
Well, you'll see a list in the book, and be sure to read over that. And I think the things we've talked about already, recognizing their backgrounds, not wasting their time. And I think if you expand on those, okay, let's look at this population and imagine yourself standing in front of a classroom or in front of a screen with 50 adults that are staring back at you. And what do you think their expectations are of their investment in this? So what are they going to get out of it? And one thing you need to do always with adults is make sure they understand what's at the end of this process. So this is where objectives, we write behavioral objectives as designers in the process, but you want to be able to show them at the end of this experience exactly what they're going to have that they didn't have before. So are they going to be able to learn a new skill? Are they going to be able to speak a new language? Are they going to be able to sign off on something that's important to them, like a certification or licensure or whatever it is? But they hate to waste their time, which leads you to they have to know how their time is being spent. So as a designer, go this extra level, go to this extra degree of input with them, and certainly through your design process, so they know exactly what's going to be at the other end of this. Mm-hmm. I'm going to invest this time. Now tell me what I'm going to get out of it.
Set that expectation so that they know they're getting from point A to point B, and there's no guesswork there. That's important.
None. Yeah, don't do that. They don't like that.
What are some challenges that designers should consider when it comes to adult learning?
Well, I think you have to look at motivation, and motivation is so incredibly important in adults. Do they really want to be there? It just touches on this whole mandated training issue on one side of it, and you always have to look at that. But also, think about this. Think through what this relationship is between what you're providing and what this learner will walk away with. So you really have to be cognizant of the fact that these are very unique individuals, and each population is going to be a little bit different. Some will not want to be there under any circumstances. You will have to grab them and take them in kicking and screaming because this is just not something they want to do. This is how I'm going to spend my morning at work. Yippee. And as a designer, there's ways to get around that. But on the other spectrum, the other side of this, there's things that adults really want to get involved in. So find a way to make things exciting for them too. So even if it's mandated, find a way to make their engagement and their participation important, and also make it worthy of some end product that they wish to reach. And I think as you look through this chapter, you're going to see that that's a very important part of this.
Yeah, I think that relevancy, that relatability to what they're actually doing in their day-to-day work, being able to relate that, what you're teaching them to, what they can bring from the classroom to their job is
Absolutely.
really important. That's really important. I mean, we've all sat through trainings that do not do that at all, where it's
You're being kind. I mean, the whole notion that Dr. Cook this has always said this, and others. This is common knowledge in design. You want to design things they can use immediately. If they can't use it when they get home, make sure they can use it the next day. And if you do that, you're probably going to have pretty good luck with adults.
perfect. Last question for you is, can you describe the impact of adult learning disabilities on instructional design?
Yeah, I think this is important to look at from a design perspective, also from a humanistic perspective. So designers always want people to do better at something. You want to give them successes and be able to do things. And what we know as designers is there's no perfect population. There's this whole range and spectrum of people that participate in our courses that we design. And some of them have challenges. Some of them are unrecognized or unacknowledged. Others are obvious. But the point being that in this chapter, I talk about these because I want to raise awareness about what's going on. So I'm dyslexic. I had a lot of trouble learning until I figured this out. It's almost impossible for me to write a sentence and have the words in the correct order and be able to do things like that. So I did not do well in high school. That was one reason. There were other reasons which we won't go into. But from a learning perspective, it was because I was never successful. It's because I couldn't read well and I couldn't write well. It was undiagnosed. And later in life was diagnosed, and it got me to a point where, now I guess I can write a couple books. But the notion, one or whatever. So it just shows you that if you spend the time with adults, you're going to be able to do this. And if you're working with certain populations, you'll be very aware of things that can happen within the training environment. So there are people that have situational involvement with something that happened in their past. And sometimes you invoke an emotion or you invoke a memory. And you have to be ready for the response in the learner. And I've seen adults do things in classes, online or otherwise, and you could just see that it's somehow got to them and it's painful for them, or they don't want to deal with that memory, or they don't want to relive that experience. And it may not be involved at all in the content or anything else, but it just hit a button and off they go. And this is not common, but it happens. And when you see adult learners disengaged and staring at the ceiling or not showing themselves on the screen, you've got to think, let me get to the reason why I'm having this. Is there an issue here that I need to be engaged in as a designer that I can work around and find some ways to make this easier? Are there other things I can do? And let me say very clearly, I don't expect you to be a psychologist or psychiatrist or psychoanalyst or anything else. That's not our role. And don't ever do that because it's not professional. What I'm saying to you is in analysis within a population, if you find that you have some things that you need to be aware of, then be aware of them and talk to experts and subject matter experts that deal with these populations and find the best way to design courses that will allow you to work through these kinds of issues.
Great. Thank you so much for this insightful chapter chat. Thank you everyone for listening, tuning in. We hope you enjoyed it and learned a lot from it as well. Be sure to subscribe to receive more notifications on future chapter chats. Thank you.